Good morning. Welcome back to Inside Sources. I'm joined by Dave Cawley, KSL investigative journalist and KSL podcast host. And Dave, it was no surprise that CBS 60 Minutes wanted to interview Utah Governor Spencer Cox, especially after his remarks following the death of Charlie Kirk. If you recall, that Friday, I think it was, a couple days after that, he gave really a very powerful speech about just moving forward and dialing back the rhetoric, and I mean he literally broke down during the speech, but it was so compelling that I think 60 Minutes decided, let's bring him in and let's talk about this and get a little bit of a different perspective.
I thought it was really interesting that they did that because, just like you said, I watched, as a lot of us did, these press conferences after the shooting in real time, and kind of seeing, the FBI people, Director Kash Patel and Spencer Cox. And to my eyes, our governor, Spencer Cox, he was the one to listen to in those interactions. I felt like he was speaking, in many ways, probably more from the heart, it felt to me, than some of those other officials who were giving you kind of what you would expect in a press conference.
Right. He spoke about the death of Charlie Kirk and seeing it unfold on social media.
The video was already out. There was no fog of war. There was no doubt what had happened. That terrible, awful video that I wish I had not seen. I hate, again, social media, that almost every person in this country, including our young people, have seen that video on a loop over and over and over again. And I can't unsee it. I can't stop seeing it. Every time I close my eyes, that's what I see.
Dave, one thing about Spencer Cox is, and I admire the man the more I hear it and see him, and he's been our governor for some time. But with this fell on the heels of another significant event here in Utah, and that was the death of the two Tremonton police officers in Box Elder County. And the reason why that was so powerful to me is that on this very show, we played parts of their funeral services. Mm-hmm. And if you recall, Governor Cox was a speaker at both of those, and his remarks were just so spot on. And I thought, boy, he can't possibly do any better. But then he rose up and did well again. And I think, CBS 60 Minutes is like, hey, let's get this guy on.
Yeah, you have to imagine the producers for 60 Minutes were looking at that. And, in many ways, Governor Cox stands out among not only all governors, but even Republican governors. And I think that's, for people who didn't see this segment on 60 Minutes, one of the things they really kind of focused in on was how Governor Cox has very publicly, campaigned. Obviously, we here in Utah, we've heard him talk about disagree better. We've seen the political ads that he's done with, opponents where they're standing together and saying, let's try to, mend the differences. But at the same time, I think, some of the more jaded among us might look at that and go, that's and I think what I took away from this is he kind of recognizes some of that as well.
Right, and he isn't trying to get everybody just to join hands and sing Kumbaya.
I get accused on the right all the time of, I just want people to have a kumbaya moment. I want people to hold hands and just hug it out. And we're done with that. We're done holding hands and hugging it out. I'm not asking anybody to hold hands and hug it out. I'm not asking for that. I'm trying to get people to stop shooting each other. That's it. And I think what I'm doing and what I'm saying is the best way to do that. Some people will disagree with that, and that's okay. We should have these debates as a society. I'm not always right. I've made mistakes. Other politicians, I think, are making mistakes right now in trying to elevate the temperature, but I'm going to just keep having these conversations.
Greg, I want to be a little frank and maybe even kind of personal here. Part of what Governor Cox was talking about in this 60 Minutes interview, and you just heard in that soundbite about people who are trying to raise the temperature rather than lower it, I feel like I see that. He's talking about social media with kids and stuff. Like, I spend more time than I should on social media. I think a lot of us identify with that. The whole term doom scroll is a thing, right? At the end of the day, I sit down, I may look at Instagram or Reddit or whatever, and it's very easy to get trapped in this mindset of the world's a terrible place, everybody's horrible, everybody in position of authority is, acting on their worst impulse. And what I feel like, Governor Cox is talking about here, this idea that we can get so focused in on that kind of a narrative that it really makes us see the world in a different and perhaps kind of dangerous way.
Yeah, and I can't agree with you more. Governor Cox told 60 Minutes correspondent Scott Pelley that reshaping this country comes from the youth.
Students gathered where Charlie Kirk was killed. Cox told the crowd they can't count on politicians. Change, he said, must come from all of you.
Thank you. Thanks for leading us out. Thank you.
I'm desperately looking for more architects and fewer arsonists. Again, it's so easy to burn down and tear down, and we've got too much of that today. I'm hoping that a positive vision for our country, a positive vision for our party, treating everyone with dignity and respect, that's how we get our country back.
Interesting. More architects and less arsonists.
I was a radio reporter and producer for a long time. That hit my ear as, ooh, that's the soundbite. And
yeah,
you
right.
understand why 60 Minutes used it. I don't know. I've not spoken to Governor Cox about this. I don't know if he workshopped that phrase or not, or if that was off the cuff. I'm going to guess it's something he's thought about before. But there's probably some truth to that too, right? Who is pushing to make an incendiary situation worse? Who's trying to build up?
Yeah, and when you hear somebody like Governor Cox, and by the way, this interview, I watched it. He was on with two other governors, both of whom were, I think one was from New Mexico and one was from Colorado. They're both Democrats.
Right.
And they were lockstep. They were talking as though they were, and in fact, he indicated one of the first calls he got after the Charlie Kirk shooting was from the Democratic New Mexico governor, who called him to console him and say, hey, what can we do? How can I help? And the CBS people actually, I don't know, it was tongue-in-cheek, said, maybe you ought to consider running for president. He's like, no, thanks.
Some people watching this interview might be thinking he should run for president, but the fact is you would never survive Republican primaries.
Well, the thought of running for president makes me nauseous. I have no interest in that. I'm glad that there are good people who are willing to do that, but that is not something I've ever been interested in. And you're also correct. The way we select our candidates makes it almost impossible for someone like me to have an opportunity.
Which is a very interesting thing for Governor Cox to say, given that, during his last gubernatorial campaign, it was a pretty, I would call it a knuckles out kind of fight against his Republican challenger.
Right. And I think that, I don't recall exactly, but I think that he was actually beat at the convention. I think that Lyman came out ahead at the convention, and that's what he's talking about here. I couldn't even get through my own primary.
Right.
The thing is, you get a Cox or you get a Mitt Romney, and in some respects, I think John Curtis is trying to bridge a little bit, where you get people who are not so hard-lined that they. But the problem is, you got to be hard-lined to get through your own convention.
Right.
Then when you get to the general election, I mean, Cox wins by a landslide because, let's face it, independents and Democrats love him. But, you like you say, you got to get through your own party. When we come back after the break, Secretary of War, I guess we're calling him that, Pete Hegseth addressed senior military leaders at Quantico in Virginia today. He outlined his vision for a new direction for the department with 10 new directives. We'll learn more from News Nation next.